Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. Are you excited? You're here at AUSA? Woohoo! That's right. So welcome to this year's Family Forums, and it's so wonderful, and I'm so grateful to be here with everyone in the room. A special welcome to our online audience. Thank you all for joining us. So my name is Holly Daly, and I'm honored to be your AUSA Family Readiness Director. So in line with AUSA's overall mission to educate, inform, and connect, AUSA Family Readiness, we're proud to be your eyes, ears, and voice, especially for our Army families and for all of you who support our Army families, so thank you. And one way that we do that is through our family forums, like the one we're kicking off today. And these are possible because of our wonderful sponsors. Their sponsorship allows us to bring in quality speakers and provides us with resources to do what we do. So today, our title sponsor for Family Forum 1 is the tremendous AUSA national partner, Leidos. So I'm gonna ask the Leidos team to please stand. Anyone here from Leidos? There you are. Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Leidos, and it's good to see all of you. We are also thankful to a wonderful team that has worked really, really hard throughout the year. So in case you don't know, we already start next year's on Thursday. So it's our planning committee led by Army G9 under the leadership of Ms. Dee Geis. And a special shout out, thank you to all of you that are in the room here, and especially Ms. Amy Rodick and Rob. Rob's over there. Thank you, Rob. I want to also say thank you to our great AUSA Family Readiness team, Thea Green, Kevon, and Kaylee, and our first senior fellows, and you will meet many of them throughout the week here, and we have one in the room today. Angel Magnum is with us. So did you ever wonder, how do we come up with these Family Forum topics? Well, they're selected because of all the collected feedback received throughout the whole year, and we do that through a variety of different ways, and especially from our families, our service members and families. So this year, we continue to support our Army because we're honored to have at least 4 quality family forums and shooting for more. So we want to continue to collect your feedback, especially today and throughout all our family forums. So we have a QR code, and that we'll put up here on the screen, and at the end of the forum, we'll have a QR code up. And so if you select that QR code, we have 3 or 4 simple questions to ask you for your feedback on the forums after each forum. And we also have an easel with a poster board in the back if you want to scan it on the way out. And if you give us your feedback, it'll take you to our first online digital swag bag, where you can have access to all the resources that you'll hear about this week. So to be a part of the conversation for the forum today, for those of you who are in the room, we have question cards. Feel free to write a question. If you hear something inspiring that comes to your mind when you're listening to the panel members, and wave it in the air, and our staff members will come receive the questions. And online, please send us your questions online. We'll pull them down and send them up to the moderator. So please just ask those questions and be part of it. Don't forget our hashtag AUSA 2023. So at this time, it is my honor, I would like to invite Dr. Patty Brown. She is our First Lady of AUSA and spouse of retired General Bob Brown, our AUSA President and CEO. So please welcome Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Holly. It's a true honor and privilege to welcome you all to the first Family Forum of the 2023 AUSA Annual Conference. Thanks so much for being here, and wow, what a great opening ceremony. I know firsthand how hard the AUSA team has worked, and they've worked tirelessly to provide the most relevant topics emerging from our Army today. This year's forums, once again, offer a wealth of information to support soldiers and families. Today's forum, Transforming Army Prevention, Care, Education, and Quality of Life, provides a closer look at the social determinants of health and the environmental conditions that impact readiness and resilience. Today's discussion will shed light on the Army's shift to a more proactive approach to harmful behaviors, from a focus on response and treatments to focusing on getting upstream and providing our soldiers and families with the skills, tools, and resources they need to help them navigate the challenges of military life before harmful behaviors emerge. As an active duty Army spouse for 37 years and an Army spouse for life for the last 3 years, resilience and identification of harmful behaviors have been an Army priority for more than 20 years. I've experienced the effects of the extreme challenges faced by our soldiers and families, and it's time for a change. I encourage you all to share the information you hear from our experts in today's forum and the forums to follow. Ask our panel of experts those hard questions. Then spread the word, because knowledge is power, and that is how we affect change and improve the quality of life for our soldiers and families. So we all can be all that we can be. To set the stage for today's first Family Forum, I'd like to welcome Lieutenant General Kevin Vereen, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Installations G9. Lieutenant General Vereen is the Principal Advisor to Army senior leaders on installation policy, plans, and resources, which includes housing, childcare, and other quality of life programs for all components. This year, he became the Headquarters Department of the Army lead for prevention. Welcome, Lieutenant General Vereen.
Wow. Hey, good afternoon. Y'all sleep in there or something? Hey, good afternoon. Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Brown. And Holly, I want to say thank you also for what you do advocating for our soldiers and families. So the Army faces a significant challenge in harmful behaviors because they have a profound effect on our units, our families, our friends, and Army readiness. In 2022, the Secretary of the Army made the prevention of harmful behaviors one of her top priorities and called for a cultural reform from responding to harmful events after they have happened to finding ways to prevent them before they start. In March, she appointed the Army G9 as the headquarters staff principal and lead for prevention programming. The intent is to unify and integrate prevention programs and stakeholders to address prevention holistically for commanders and to better support soldiers, families, and the Army community. This forum is designed to advance the prevention discussion and to lay out our efforts to transform and strengthen prevention across the spectrum. Today, you're going to hear terms that might be new to many of you, terms like social determinants of health, protective factors, risk factors, and social ecological model. First, we are going to hear from Dr. Craig Bryan. He is a Trott Gebhardt Phillips Endowed Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health at The Ohio State University. I'm not going to hold that against him. And a Division Director for Recovery and Resilience. Dr. Bryan deployed to Balad, Iraq in 2009, where he served as the Director of the Traumatic Brain Injury Clinic at the Air Force Theater Hospital. He separated from active duty service shortly after his deployment and started researching PTSD, suicidal behaviors, and suicide prevention strategies, and psychological health and resiliency. He has held faculty appointments at the University of Texas Health San Antonio, the University of Utah, and the Ohio State University College of Medicine. He recently served on the Secretary of Defense Suicide Prevention and Response Independent Review Committee to conduct the comprehensive review of the department's efforts to address and prevent suicide. He is going to lay the groundwork for today's forum and to share his knowledge on resilience and the prevention of harmful behaviors, and then moderate a panel to discuss prevention and the work that the Army is doing in this space. Dr. Bryan, welcome.
Thank you, General, for that introduction. I appreciate it. It's nice to spend some time with all of you today to talk a little bit about the work that I've done, primarily focused on suicide prevention within the military over the past decade and a half. Now, a question that I'm constantly asked, I would say it's one of the most frequently asked questions that I receive is, what's the one thing we could do better to prevent more suicides? I'll say it's a really hard question to answer. And the reason it's so hard is because suicide is so complex. In many respects, trying to answer that question is like trying to answer a different question, which is, how can we prevent people from dying in car crashes? Well, there's no one strategy that will work. We would actually have to use a multitude of strategies. And probably any single strategy by itself would not necessarily be particularly satisfying. We wouldn't probably see enormous reductions in mortality rates if we just did one thing. And so that is, I think, this ongoing struggle that we have with suicide prevention, is that we're always looking for that one strategy that works. And I think, in my experience over the past decade and a half, the one strategy that we've really invested a lot of time, effort, and resources into focuses on healthcare solutions, suicide risk screening, referring people to behavioral health. And although we've done more and more of that over the past decade, we haven't yet seen a reversal of the trends. And unfortunately, perhaps one of the unintended outcomes is that we've clogged up the behavioral health system because we send more and more people, which means longer wait times, longer gaps between mental health appointments and sessions. And so there was this sort of unexpected consequence to sort of doubling down on a primary approach to suicide prevention. And so one of the other things that we learned as a part of the SPIRC over the past year, as we visited different installations and interviewed thousands of service members, a question that we routinely asked in all of our focus groups and all the meetings that we had was, what's kind of the leading stressor for you? What makes life in the military really difficult right now? And the questions or the answers that we received were perhaps not what many expected. They largely involve quality of life issues. I like to always share actually the number one most frequently reported answer to that question, what's the most stressful part of being in the military? Computer systems. Takes me 30 minutes to log in the morning. Teams doesn't work. Email doesn't work. I can't join meetings. The printers don't work. The computers don't work. And we get backlogged. And because I can't do all of these computer-based trainings and requirements in a timely fashion, I work through lunch. And I stay late. And I don't go home and spend time with my family. And I come in on weekends just to stay on top of things. And so one of the big takeaways from my time on the SPIRC was that a major piece of the puzzle that we're missing really involves quality of life issues. Mental health, behavioral health, and medical services are one piece of the puzzle, but it's not the entire puzzle. And so we need to start looking much more broadly at factors that can degrade well-being and that can get in the way of people living good lives. And so sometimes when I present that as a potential way forward, I get confused looks and say, well, what does that mean? Why would we focus on things like computers and housing, and making sure people get reimbursed in a timely manner, right? Well, it's because those things create stress and strain. They present psychological hazards that affect all of us. It wears us down, it grinds us to the bone, such that when we do encounter major stressors in life, we don't have as much in the tank to fully respond effectively to whatever life happens to throw at us. And so when I think about the future of suicide prevention, I often kind of call to mind the image of a farmer, where if we were to all imagine ourselves as being farmers and we have a crop that we're wanting to grow and be bountiful and have a good yield, we would have to do more than just plant seeds. We would also have to water the fields. not too much, but also not too little. We would have to make sure there's the right amount of sunlight exposure, not too much, but not too little. We'd probably have to check the soil pH levels periodically to make sure there's a right balance for the crops to grow. We might have to fertilize to make sure there's nutrients. We would have to address pests to make sure that they don't damage the crops, and also tend to any disease processes to make sure we don't lose the whole crop. If we as farmers were to plant those seeds and do none of those other activities, it would be mistaken of us when all of our crops wilt and die to say, I just didn't have resilient enough seeds. And I think that's my concern about what has happened as we think about suicide prevention and resilience more broadly, is that we think about it as something that a person has, sort of like we have these little meters above our head, and it can be low or it can be full, and we just need to figure out who has low resilience, and then we got to refer them to get help, and then that resilience will be built up and everything will be okay. In reality, though, resilience and suicide risk is a community and a social issue. In the same way that resilience from a farming perspective means that we have to do things to create the conditions by which crops will grow and thrive. We need to do the same thing in our families, in our workplaces, and our communities as well. All that is to say is, I think where we need to go as it relates to suicide prevention is helping to create lives that are worth living. Suicide prevention is not just about stopping people from dying and keeping them alive. It's about helping them to find purpose and meaning. It's about helping them to achieve well-being in their lives. One thing that I've learned as a psychologist, as a suicide researcher, I mean, there's decades of studies finding this as well, is that, when a person is sort of confronted with that decision about attempting suicide or not, what we've learned is that there's often a weighing of options. What are the pros and cons of living? What are the pros and cons of dying? And there's sort of this mental math that happens where we assign value to our experiences in living. And if living doesn't carry enough value, it reduces the likelihood of someone choosing against suicide. And so to wrap up, I think the hope that I have as we kind of maybe think about the future of suicide prevention is, again, reminding ourselves suicide prevention is not just about asking one another, are you having thoughts of suicide? It's not just about referring them to hospitals and calling 911 and getting them into therapy. I can promise you we will not mental health treatment our way out of this. We also need to take a step back and look at the conditions in which all of us live, we work, we play, we socialize with one another. My hope is that we can take up the charge to start looking at quality of life issues, because I think if we can create the conditions that make life worth living, we'll have a much greater impact on reducing suicide and other harmful behaviors. And so I thank you for giving me a little opportunity to kind of speak what's been on my mind in the past few years. I've been asked to also facilitate a panel to talk about some of what the Army is doing in this space. And so at this time, I'd like to bring up our panel to the stage to discuss the Army's efforts to transform prevention and reduce harmful behaviors across the force. So first, Ms. Dee Geis, the newly appointed Director of Prevention, Resilience, and Readiness in the Army G9. We'll have everybody come up together. I'll introduce them, and then maybe we can do the applause at the end. Okay? All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so Ms. Geis. The next to Ms. Geis is Brigadier General William Green, Jr., Deputy Chief of Chaplains, Office of the Chief of Chaplains. And then next to him is Colonel Sam Preston, Commander, Blanchfield Army Community Hospital at Fort Campbell. And then also joining the panel is Ms. Julie Yeary. She's a clinical social worker with over 40 years of experience working with families. She specializes in working with children under 5 in military-connected families. Okay, so welcome, panel. All right, so at this time, I'll ask the panel to provide some opening remarks, starting with Ms. Geis.
Thanks, Dr. Bryant. Am I on? Is this thing on? It's on? There we go. It was me. I'm the problem. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so delighted to be here and to talk about this topic specifically. Just a little bit about myself. I am a spouse of a now retired soldier for 37 years, a duty civilian for 27 years, and an Army mom for 17. So that the numbers just worked out that way. So I'm really proud of our Army for having this discussion today. As we know, in the past, there's been a lot of task force and OPTs looking at this issue. For me personally, going back to around 2010, when General Corelli was the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, that was the Health Promotion, Risk Reduction, Suicide Prevention Task Force, and there's been a large body of work since then, most recently culminating with the People First Task Force, and I know I saw Ms. Randon here earlier, and her leadership was pivotal in this area that led us to this discussion here today. So when we talk about prevention, we haven't recently talked about prevention on a spectrum, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit. I can't speak from a scientific space, but I will speak from a parent space. And as the mother of boys, the concept is very basic. I've never once in 35 years been effective at just having my kids sit down without a healthy environment and having them behave themselves. It just doesn't work. So when you talk about the community concept that Dr. Bryant talked about, that is where we are taking this conversation, the cultural reform, as General Vereen had mentioned. Prevention on a spectrum is upstream prevention before there's a harmful behavior, intervention, which is where most of our effort is focused right now, intervening after there's a problem, and then the tertiary prevention, which is more long-term treatment, and I know Dr. Preston can talk about that a little bit more. Let me back up a little bit to the Quality of Life Task Force the Secretary has directed of us. So we have 5 lines of effort there: housing, healthcare, childcare, spouse employment, PCS moves. And I'm going to pull this all together in just a minute here. But we've been working on that for 3 years. That was stood up, listening to Army families and soldiers about what those stressors are on day-to-day military life. Those 5 focused areas have received a lot of attention, money, policy changing, process changes. But as we pull the prevention conversation forward and look at the social determinants of health, and those are the built environment, health care, economic security, we start to overlay all of these quality of life issues that we've been working on social determinants of health, and we come to the conclusion very quickly, everything that we deliver in a military environment that is not intervention or treatment is upstream prevention. It's quite simple. I see our MCOM team here right in the front row. MWR is the first thing that comes to mind when I talk about upstream. If you want to talk about healthy outlets, it's everything we deliver in that regard. Our Army Community Service Centers and the help that is delivered through financial readiness counseling, new parent support, and those sorts of programs, as well as our child and youth services. On the military, we have our CR2Cs that are our health promotion councils, all of those sorts of programs and processes on our installation. Bottom line, that is all upstream prevention, and that is precisely where we're heading with this conversation. I don't want to take up a lot of airspace, but I am happy to be here. I am happy to answer your questions, and Chaplain, over to you.
All right, thanks, Dee. I really appreciate it. So it's great to be here today. Really was looking forward to this and having this discussion. I've been in the Army now for soon will be 30 years, and I've served at pretty much every level. And at each level, one thing's consistent, is you have people. And the wonderful thing about that is it's an opportunity for me, especially as a chaplain, to provide care, and I'll take it a step further, and also to love them, to make sure that they're well and that they're doing well. I think probably the biggest challenge is when, as a chaplain, as I see people going through difficult challenges in life, is just trying to ensure that I'm entering into that space. Of course, just like we've talking about prevention, I'd like to maybe do some things prior to them entering into that space so that they might respond to those challenges in a different manner. I can tell you, I agree, Dr. Bryan, it's really a complex issue, but it doesn't mean that we, don't try, that we don't keep trying to do things. And so throughout this panel today, I'll say a few things about some initiatives that we've had with Dr. Preston and his team, but most importantly, just ways of really integrating and connecting with people and really talking about what that really means. There's that thing called pretty much surface connection, and most of us probably know what that looks like, but then I'm talking about at a deeper level. And for a chaplain or a military service member, if we're really going to get at prevention, I think we have to take the time to do that, to really connect and care. And it's time consuming. I realize that. A lot of people might say, hey, I really don't have the time for that. That's a mission for the chaplain. But it's really our mission, right? So when you can't do it, I can tell you that there are chaplains and others out there willing to take the handoff and say, hey, look, I'll provide care and compassion for that person. So this is really an exciting opportunity, I think a very important opportunity for us to just talk about prevention. How do we get there, and what do we do to sustain it? And throughout this time, I hope to say a few words about sustaining it, because there are ways to do that, and I think commanders have those tools at their disposal to help sustain what it means to really dig in deep into prevention, but also help produce a ready soldier, and I'll take it a step further, a ready family. Because if we can get the family and the soldier, or the soldier and the family ready, that's where I think we really will meet the demands on us as an Army, and we'll also make sure that we take care of our people. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Colonel Sam Preston. I'm currently the commander of Blanchfield Army Community Hospital. And so a little bit different than my fellow panelists, I'm a little more tactical. And I'm so grateful to be a part of this panel to discuss how we, and I like, Chaplain, how you said we as a community can address not only suicide risk, but general health and wellness risks throughout our formations and our families. And so I'm a psychiatrist and family physician by training, but what was interesting, in a previous job, I was the Chief of Army Behavioral Health. And in that position, I developed a relationship with Major General Soljan, then the Chief of Chaplains, the Spirituality Readiness Initiative. And what was interesting about the time when we looked at this program is, many of you may remember that Alaska was going through a pretty significant suicide cluster. And speaking to what Dr. Bryan had mentioned, we wanted something that would solve all of the problems all at once. And there was a lot of resources that were sent to Alaska. There was a lot of investigations, and a team of myself, including 12 others from both G9, G1ARD, Defense Health Agency, a lot of smart people. We went to Alaska to help solve Alaska's problems. And what was interesting is what we discovered is Alaska held the key the whole time. And it was the idea of instilling a sense of purpose, mission, and value to a community that prior felt like they were a northern stepchild. And so simply changing the name to the 11th Airborne wasn't just a moniker or a motto now, but it gave a community a sense of belonging and being and purpose. And things like buying airplane tickets for soldiers so they could fly down to Seattle to see their families over Christmas. Little things like that were people first, truly people first, made a difference. And so how I observe my role as a tactical medical leader in this organization is through our CR2Cs, our Community Risk Reduction Councils. I provide information to the senior leaders who are at closest area of impact so that they can focus on efforts. For instance, Fort Campbell is looking at brand new barracks to modernize our barracks at Fort Campbell. In talking with the senior leaders of our garrison, we discovered that there are barracks plans that were developed by experts at the University of Boston and Boston universities that maximize community collaboration and communal living together. By us providing that information through these community resources, we're able to influence the wellness of the community. So I'm very much looking forward to answering any questions you have and discussing how we can collaboratively work together to improve the wellness of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Preston. And, thank you, Holly, for inviting me, General Vereen and everyone. I am probably the cousin because I spent most of my career following around a Marine, okay? So y'all have pity on me now, right? Because following a Marine which their whole value of do more with less isn't necessarily the best thing for families. And I spent most of my career working with military families from all services, and most recently at 0 to 3, where I'm very proud to say I was the Director of Military Family Projects before I retired 2 years ago. And I love the work so much. I'm so passionate about it, they can't get rid of me. I keep showing up to do things. And I'm very excited to share with you some of the programs that they've been developing for military families that I believe speak directly to what we're talking about today. Many of you know the work of 0 to 3. Hopefully you're familiar with books like these over there, helping parents connect to their child and their child connect to their parent even if they're deployed. Home Again, that helps talk about reunion and reunification for little ones. And I'm Here for You Now, which helps to normalize the fact that little kids have real feelings that need to be addressed. These are the things that I've made my career doing. So you can bet that my whole life has been dedicated on how do we help prevent our youngest children from having barriers to being all they can be, right? How do we help them to maximize their potential? And so much of what we do focuses on supporting protective factors in our families. Now, Surgeon Bell in the 70s actually said risk factors are not risk factors are not predictive factors because of protective factors. So if we can build our protective factors for our families, we can help our families so that they don't succumb to the real challenges that some of us take it for granted in the military that, oh yes, deployment, family separation, go to school, but our kids don't see it that way. To them, their mommy or their daddy is gone. And you know what? The research shows quite strongly that PTSD rates are higher if children are having a difficult time with behavior at home. And children's behavior at home is worse if there's risk of PTSD at home. There is a connection between, as Jeree Paul used to say, how we are, because how we are is just as, if not more important than what we do. So how can we change this message of solving kids who have behavior problems, youth who have behavior problems, to hearing what that behavior is telling us and addressing it from the first part, which includes involving the entire family. You cannot treat just a child, you have to look at the whole family. And guess what, guys? You are all a part of one family, one beautiful family. I've seen so many people greeting each other today, it's just so wonderful. But I think that's part of the idea is how do we create a sense of community for our families? So I'm very excited to be here today and help address any questions about how do we think about this when we're talking about our younger soldier family members. So thank you.
All right, well, thank you all for your initial thoughts. So what we'll do now is we're going to take some questions for our in-house audience. Please use the question cards that were on your seats and make sure you raise them high in the air so our staff can see them. They're going to come pick them up from you and pass them along to us. We also have some mic runners in the room. If you want to ask your question verbally, just raise your hand and they'll bring you a microphone. We also have staff in the room monitoring the streaming webcast for questions, and so as they come through, those will be written down. I'll be reading some of those questions as well. When you are writing down or submitting your questions, please remember to identify your location and who the question is targeted for before posting your question or giving it to us. We want to address as many questions as possible, so please be as concise as possible when you're asking the questions. Okay? So as you all start putting together your thoughts and start submitting your questions to us, I have a few here to at least get things kicked off for us. The first question I have, I'm going to direct this towards Ms. Geis, but would be interested in other thoughts as well from others. Soldiers and families join this great Army bearing a burden of past hardships and sometimes significant trauma. Oftentimes they suffer in silence, which can lead to harm. How do you think we can reach them early and effectively to help them to thrive in the Army?
That's going to sound like a hard question, but it's not. It's easy. It's getting in our training base early with these soldiers. We do it to some extent, but not to the extent that we need to. And I'm going to tell a story real quick and pardon those who have heard it before. So our son, when he was a platoon leader in the reserves, left his reserve weekend, watched one of his soldiers in his platoon walk out into the woods. So he followed him in. He found that this soldier's mother had just passed. His father kicked him out of the house. His only source of income was his reserve pay. So he called me. Right, so I said, well, you need to talk to your chain of command. The climate was not set for him to make that phone call. Luckily, Hampton Roads area has a pretty amazing veteran center. So I said, get your soldier in there. They'll help get him on his feet, get a shelter and a roof over his head. And it was a profound moment for me. As the mother of a soldier, and this being my career for so many years, that he had no idea what his next steps were. And it was also profound to me that we have a lot of soldiers in our formation that can't call mom for this kind of information. I think we just plain and simple need to get into the training base, not only for leadership skills, but take it just like they tell you on the airplane, put your mask on first. So that you can help others around you. And we need soldiers to get that mask on first and grow them as leaders with this information and data. And just one more data point, a friend of ours went to Brigade Command, went to PCC, pre-command course, came out and said, hey, Dee, you got great programs in all the right places, but you didn't tell me about them until I'm an old guy, right? I'm not touching soldiers like that anymore. So those 2 points, early in the career and later in the career, we have a huge information and knowledge gap, I think. I'll pause there and pass on to the other panel members.
I would say one other piece to that, along the continuum of the movements in the life cycle, is taking advantage of areas of transition where there's the highest risk. I think that there's also an opportunity for us as an organization to look at the PCS cycle and how we individually at our installations tailor a prevention program that best informs our spouses, families, and soldiers of the new community that they're joining. I am a newly PCS'd officer to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and if you have ever been to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, let me tell you, they wrap their arms around you, and you don't have a choice. You are a member of their community. But that's the first time that I can say that it has been just so seamless. And I believe that those transitions are both an opportunity, but also a high-risk time, that if we don't focus those resources on educating our new family members when they're a little bit of an audience that we have them as a captive audience when they're going through that SRP site or where they're going through that new family welcome center. I think that's an opportunity that we can also provide a lot of our information, and then the community unique resources and places to avoid so that they can best start on the right foot on their new location.
Mm-hmm. And if I could build on what you're saying, the idea of building in, using natural occurring moments to kind of build the knowledge base, significant life events. The Army, the Department of Defense has recently started a pilot program within the military. The Army has several locations called Healthy Steps, where when you think about an opportunity for people to open up and say, what am I doing? When you're having a baby, that's kind of a significant one, right? And so what they do is they embed a developmental specialist right into the pediatric clinic so that every time someone takes their child in for a well-child visit, they're also seeing, just naturally, they don't have to have a problem, they're seeing this developmental specialist who talks about anticipatory guidance, what's going on, screen for social determinants of health regularly, at least once a year, also screen for things like depression and other forms of stress, and are there as a conduit to connect those families to the resources that are unique to that particular area. Whether it's, right now there's programs in Vilseck and Ramstein, there's Launchstoel, there's programs at Fort Bragg, Tripler, and JBLM. And so these are opportunities we're hopefully slowly growing it as Department of Defense is able to. But these are opportunities when moments like having a baby that you can take advantage and reach out to families and say, hey, what's going on and how can we get you connected in a way that you feel like you are part of this community. So right from the start.
Well, it's a readiness consideration too, because in 18 years, those babies are our future soldiers.
Yes.
And we deliver about 1,500 to 1,600 children a year at Blanchfield. And we like to say that we produce at least a battalion of future Army in 18 years. So healthy moms, because we know if you have postpartum depression or you're depressed during your pregnancy, lower birth weights, it also can impact IQ. To your point, these touch points are essential, identifying them and really taking advantage of them, not just for the current fight, but for our future fight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that too by saying, there are times when, and I kind of think of this as on a spectrum, right? So, because I'm going to say something here that may sound a little bit, it could be overboard, but it's like intrusive leadership, right? So you see something around you, something that's happening, and there's something about it that's just not right, and just taking the time to stop and have words or to express maybe an idea or a thought on how maybe even you worked through that yourself in the past. And I think those are opportunities where we can take advantage of those, but also let the folks that are going through the challenge know that they're not the only ones going through the challenge, and they probably won't be the last one to go through the challenge. And so a little bit of intrusive leadership, but yet at the same time with the right amount of balance, and I'm going to say compassion, right? The right amount of balance and compassion where that individual or those individuals know you care.
All right, well, this next question is for Colonel Preston, General Green, and Ms. Geis. What have we identified and what can we replicate from what worked in Alaska to other locations across the Army?
Yeah. I'll take a first stab by saying that the chaplains were involved in that process, and what I mean by in that process. So General Eifler wanted to do what he calls Mission 100, and he wanted to make sure that all of his people saw or talked to someone. It could either be a chaplain, behavioral health expert, or a military family life consultant. And so one of the things that we did as chaplains to make sure that we put the right people in that environment is we have a couple what we call additional skill identifiers, where individuals are either family life trained or they're trained in what we call clinical pastoral education. And so as we screened for participants in Mission 100, what we wanted to make sure is that we sent the right people. We were able to get those particular folks on the ground there, and from all accounts, what we've heard is that they came in and they helped significantly, and they were absolutely value added to the process. But I think just the intentionality piece of ensuring that we had the right people there, we could have very easily just gone through tour of duty and say, hey, we need 15 chaplains, and anybody could sign up. The person who might be looking for a nice winter vacation might sign up, going to Alaska, but that was not the intent. The intent was absolutely to make sure that we gave that commander the right soldier, chaplain, and religious affairs specialist as well, to provide the care and compassion where it was needed.
From my perspective, it was helping commanders that want to do the right thing, the ability to see themselves a little bit. And Major General Andrzejak, then Major General Andrzejak and Eifler, when we were able to look at some just general health indicators, sleep, nutrition, stress management, we were able to provide feedback on simple barracks conditions. They were not necessarily aware that all of the barracks, in the summertime, it's almost 24 hours of daylight, but they didn't have blackout curtains. So soldiers that were sensitive to light couldn't necessarily sleep or get that quality rest so that they could perform. Absence of sleep is equivalent to drinking and driving if you don't get adequate sleep. So they were very quickly able to take the information that the medical community and garrison community observed, and they quickly fixed those problems, which I think was very, very good. To the point about the Mission 100, what I found very special about that is, to say this in a way to not seem like I'm trying to do a Heisman, but we culturally have identified individuals that are going through life's challenges. Oh, your sweetheart broke up with you, you just lost your car, you don't know how you're going to make your next rent payment. You should probably talk to Dr. Preston. We've become this very quick to refer to expertise. And what was interesting about Mission 100 is they said, no. We don't need the psychiatrist. We don't need the embedded behavioral health expert. We're going to use our military family life counselors, our chaplains, our community members, and we're going to maximize just general care and observation of one another. So I thought that was a good way for them not to overuse the specialists, because we have a very limited supply of those, and those need to see the truly sick. But they were able to use resources in a way that allowed the command to have touch points. And I just need to foot stomp. Because of that, chaplains and MFLCs are now in many of our embedded behavioral health clinics, and I think that is fantastic, and that's where the Army should continue to go.
Well, I was going to say military family life counselors, but
Sorry,
they already did. But I will say there were significant improvements and investments in morale, welfare, recreation programs, and child, youth, and school programs, and our Army Community Service programs. So fixing processes, making the investments that we did in Alaska, I think we're already seeing, and I'm getting head nods, I think we're already seeing changes in Alaska with that regard.
Thanks. One other thing that comes to mind as you all were giving those responses, because the unique context of Alaska and the unique needs and concerns. And one thing that really stands out to me is that, in essence, listening to the needs of the community itself, because blackout curtains perhaps would be less impactful anywhere other than Alaska. And kind of the take home from that is, how do we then go to each of our own communities and say, what are our needs here, so that we can potentially tackle them in the same way that you all were able to start addressing some of those issues up in Alaska. So this next question is for Ms. Yeary. Knowing that the reserve component families are in communities that are not as sensitive to military culture, what do you suggest the Army could do to better assist those families?
I have seen outstanding services support for reserve families in making connections within the community and really knowing that community well, really knowing what services are available, and then connecting those families to those services. The other thing that I think is really difficult for our reserve families is they're located all over the place, right? They're not co-located in base housing. They live everywhere. So how do you bring them together? So having org days or family days where you have a reason for them to come together, reaching out, cold calls to families, reaching out saying, hey, we're just calling to let you know this is going on. We actually started a once a month check-in, and I helped a guard unit in Wisconsin when they were deployed, making monthly calls to family members. So really doing that high touch kind of outreach to families really made a huge difference. And then changing the dynamic from, if you have a problem, you can call, to, hey, let's stay in touch. Let's stay connected. We are in this together. And I think that changes the dynamics for the reservists. Most states have fantastic support programs for families, great services for youth of all ages. The schools have great programs. And one of the programs that I would really like, if you are involved with a reserve family and you don't have the services in your community, get in touch with your Military Child Education Coalition and see if you can't involve their programming within your schools to get your schools more oriented to bringing these military kids together to feel that mutual support. So there's a lot of great things that can happen, but it starts with creating that sense of community within the command. So.
Next question is for Colonel Preston. Have MTFs considered implementing the trauma-informed and integrated healthcare system framework created by CMHS?
So I have to put this out a little bit just for background. So the military health system has undergone a transformation, and that transformation is complete. And so when you go back to your camps, posts, and stations, when you talk with your chief executive of your hospital, you're going to be speaking to a director within the Defense Health Agency and also a commander within the Army. And I say that because the question specifically on the types of trauma-related therapies that we're looking to provide is on my director hat. And suffice to say that Captain Megan Corso, the chief of the behavioral health community here at the Defense Health Agency, is perpetually looking for the most advanced treatments, not only for PTSD, but for major depressive disorder, alcohol and substance use disorders. And we are guided by the Department of Defense and VA clinical practice guidelines for all of those. So in short, we are developing more advanced treatments both for trauma, but also for depression, and also for substance use disorders, amongst others, anxiety. But we need to make sure that before we go across the whole MHS, 9 million beneficiaries, that it is a proven clinical practice guideline. And so we're looking at it, but not completely out through the whole organization. Thank you for that question.
Right, we have a few questions sort of around the same topic, so I'll kind of do my best to integrate them. And everyone on the stage is listed on these cards here, so we'll maybe go round robin here. The questions surround the concept of a life worth living, and we have some people asking, well, how would we describe or define a life worth living. There's some questions about how much control does an individual have over their own life worth living, and then the questions about social considerations as well, in terms of changes in religious affiliation and engagement with religious groups, political cultural shifts, concern about the environment, global instability, et cetera. So kind of a big question with a lot of different perspectives. So I think we'll have hopefully a lot of different ideas to give here. So Ms. Geis, go ahead.
Okay, so everything that you just talked about is deeply rooted in social connectedness. So we talked a little bit about the Surgeon General report on loneliness as an epidemic, and it cites in that report that the single most effective protective factor against harmful behavior for people with and without a behavioral health diagnosis is social connectedness. So it is everything that you just mentioned, and I hope I didn't steal everybody's thunder here, but I'm going to go back and foot stomp again about the community context and everything we deliver on the community. There is an opportunity to connect socially with your families, in your units, with your communities writ large. So I'm going to say it again: Army Community Services, Morale, Welfare, Recreation, Child, Youth, and School Services, Chaplain Services. So that's fine.
Yeah, so I would start by just kind of talking a little bit about the spiritual core and meaning and purpose, right? I know that meaning and purpose looks different for all of us. All of us, it's different. But what's, I think, important is that we all, I think, have to realize that we're spiritual beings, right? And to whatever degree what that looks like, it may look different for some people than for others. But that is a main part of really beginning to really understand what a life worth living is like. That is either there are certain things that you like to do that could be volunteering. It could be working at your church, your mosque, or your synagogue, or your temple. It could be helping folks at a soup kitchen. But a lot of that starts with this whole aspect of, meaning and purpose. And that sometimes is not easily achieved to know exactly what that is, very early in our life's journey. I can use me for an example. It took me a little while before I figured out what I really wanted to do. I came into the Army. I was enlisted when I came in, but I got a call to ministry while I was in the Army. In the Army, I got a call to ministry. Now, you could say, boy, a lot of things happen to people when they join the Army, but not too many get a call to ministry, right? I did, and I tell you, it is one of the best, absolute best things that could have ever happened to me. And there was my sense of meaning and purpose and my life worth living. Regardless of what happens in the world today, I think that all of us really, we have to look at what our sense of meaning and purpose and where that's derived from and how it drives us to, to achieve certain things. One of the things I love about, people who volunteer is a lot of time they feel like they have something they can give back. And a lot of times they absolutely have something they can give back. But it starts from there. And for our soldiers, our family members, our civilians, we want to help them. And when I say we, I'm talking really, in the Army as a chaplain, we want to help them to connect with that as early as possible. What we've found recently is a lot of them connect with it in basic training, right? And I went to basic training, and I connected with it too. I was like, Lord, please help me, make it through this process. These people are yelling at me, and they're asking me to carry all these bags I brought on the bus at one time. And so, yeah, I connected with it. But I think it's really, really, really important to find that sense of connection and that meaning and purpose. And I believe then, once that happens, the whole idea of a life worth living could really illuminate right in front of you.
Yeah, it's hard to follow that and hear.
That's why I went first.
Yeah, that's. But just the Surgeon General's report, what was interesting, and I just listened to a podcast preparing for this, isolation in and of itself, and if you think about the Surgeon General's office, they've been foot stomping anti-smoking and anti-drinking, especially during pregnancy, for 30 years. And what Dr. Murthy's done is he said, no, if you look at the studies, isolation has as much impact on your quality of life and longevity as either of those two. We must look at isolation within our society. So we have developed a lot of bad habits as a result of COVID. We have functionally isolated ourselves for our own health benefit for about 3 years. What I was reassured to hear was that today, AUSA, this is the largest AUSA in history, that this is the largest they've had. But what that tells me is people are starting to come out again. We need to take this momentum because people are hungry for this. Now we have to have really thoughtful ways of bringing people together, bringing them back outside of where they've been kind of keeping to themselves, and make it meaningful so that they can build those relationships. And it was not by accident that I, as the Chief of Army Behavioral Health, it was my priority effort was to cultivate the relationship with the chaplaincy. And it was nice to hear the Surgeon General also say the decline of our community squares, our churches, our Kiwanis clubs, our Lions clubs, our VFW. If you aren't paying attention, these might be going right by you, but they're withering. They need some water. They need some cultivation. And it's not just a spiritual issue, it is a public mental health issue. We have to get out and we have to care about each other and one another. And it's up to everybody in this room, not just Dr. Preston, to provide that.
Again, hard to follow all of that, but I want to speak on behalf of our youth and our babies and our toddlers. And one of the things we know is they get the message about why we do something from their caregivers, right? And so how do they make meaning of mommy having to go away for 8 weeks to a school or deploy for 4 months? Or me having to leave my friends and we're being moved across the country or across the world. How do we make meaning of that, right? And it comes from their caregivers, their parents. And so one of the things we do at 0 to 3 in this wonderful book over there that if you haven't read, you should read, is this lovely thing of helping parents give words so they can share that with their child. How do you explain a deployment to a 2-year-old, right? How about, my daddy would like to be here with me, but he has very important work he must do there. So we change it from, the Army sent them away again, I can't, I hate this Army, to, you know what, your parent is doing important work. So if we can help our family members find meaning in the amazing work that our American heroes are doing and understand that they're a part of that and convey that to their children, what a difference it might make in how they see these sacrifices they're making as family members, right? And so that's what I also want to emphasize. We want to make sure we have meaning, but we also want to make sure we're conveying that to our kids so that they can hear it loud and clear. So,
Well, I guess the comments that I would add then is, how do we define or how do we describe a life that's worth living? I think, I get to be a psychologist now in my answer and say, well, what do you think a life worth living means? And I think that's actually key because, each person I think does have to define that for themselves personally. Obviously, I think what we ultimately decide or determine is meaningful or purposeful to us will be influenced by our colleagues and our friends and our family and our life experiences. But I think the thing that I've certainly learned is that I don't know that there is sort of a right answer to that or a wrong answer. And the interesting thing, been doing more and more research on this. I've been really fascinated by purpose and meaning and well-being. And one of the things we find is that it is sort of at the individual level when a person is able to say, I know what my purpose is, that there is a protection. At the group level, so say like in a military unit, what's interesting, the aspect of purpose and meaning that matters most is morale. It's positive emotional states. And so at a collective level, we don't actually have to agree on what purpose is. What matters the most and what seems to support that purpose is that we're around people that are enjoyable, that have a good mood, that have a good outlook in life, they're optimistic. It doesn't mean that they're Pollyanna-ish, but it means that, they're there to support you, they're there to help you out. And I think that's one of the interesting things that research tells us is that positive psychological states are actually infectious. And we see that in the military as well, that if people are assigned to units that as a whole have a good sense of like positive emotionality and good morale, everybody in the unit is protected and they're better able to identify their own purpose and meaning. And so I think what that means for like leaders and commanders is what are those activities and those things that we can do to build morale, the little activities on a day-to-day basis, but also being able to address some of these quality of life issues, because those little things in life usually kind of wear us down again. And I've even started to kind of talk about suicide of late as sort of like death by 1,000 paper cuts, where it just kind of slowly grinds a person down. So addressing those quality of life issues seems to actually help people find their purpose.
Dr. Bryan, if I could.
Yeah.
You just stimulated a thought, and Walter Reed Army Institute of Research and Dr. Amy Adler and her tremendous body of work have looked at cohesion and psychologically minded leadership. And there's been several studies through OIF, but we love to empower leaders at the lowest level. But if you look at psychologically minded company commanders and first sergeants, they have more impact than the combat exposure of their troops at reducing behavioral health casualty. So I'll say it a different way. If you are a psychologically minded leader at the company level, that means that your soldiers trust you, that they can come to you with an issue. Our research shows that drops PTSD, depression, anxiety, insomnia by almost 50% versus if they had no kidding direct combat versus being inside the wire the entire time. So leaders make a difference. And I'm going to give a real quick plug that there is a product called Team Core. It's team and it's cohesion and organization resilience enhancement. This has been studied by Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, and you can engage it because we need to teach these company-grade leaders on how to be that psychologically minded individual, and we have resources to help them.
So it's back to the comment about training base. We've got to get in the training base.
Yeah.
Because we don't, so, I won't, cast a broad net on it, but we know that some soldiers come in without those skills, or none at all, to be able to accomplish that. So we have to get in the training base.
Yeah. Saying that the Army is a team sport is presumptuous because you believe that our soldiers have been on a team. Just think about that. We have a lot of soldiers that are coming from high school that have never been on an athletic team. So when we say that the Army is a team sport, we need to make sure that we know what our audience is and meet them where they are.
Yeah, I'd add to that too that, and back to what Ms. Geis said about, folks coming in the military and from different walks of life. So one of the things, and Colonel Preston's very familiar with this, is we call it the SRI, but it's the Spiritual Readiness Initiative. If you look at FM 7-22, health and holistic fitness, and you look at chapter 10, it talks about spiritual. For years, spiritual was not really added, right? We talked about sleep, nutrition, physical, you name it, mental, all those things, right? But not necessarily focused on the spiritual. So back to the whole sense of a life worth living, right? And then people coming into the organization. When they come into the organization, they're now a part of the Army family. And as a part of the Army family, now will be exposed to the values that the Army has. And so the Spiritual Readiness Initiative really targeted the spiritual core. And that is the whole idea of folks having meaning and purpose. And the way Chaplain Soljum is the chief of chaplains, the way he got after that, I think was remarkable in that the intent was to really try to build up from the ground as well as from the top, right? So when he went to the field, he would then talk to leaders about the spiritual dimensions and the things that may concern them. But that's something that I think that, for a number of years where the conversation around religion and spirituality was not very popular, and, it kind of was sidelined. And I think what we've done now, it's probably almost a generation or so, or even more, where that conversation was not at the table, but now it's in our institution. And it is a huge part of our prevention effort, that as a member of the United States Army, we want to ensure that people's spiritual core, that they're ready. If you look back to an old General George C. Marshall, he talked about that. He talked about the soldier's spirit, the soldier's soul, all those things that are important. He says, because if the soldier's soul isn't ready, then the soldier probably won't be ready to do what the nation's asking them to do. So this is where I think prevention is absolutely connected to this part of who we are as an Army. And as we bring in new members to the Army family every day, we have them coming in every day, we have to ensure that they understand what our values are as an Army. Now, when I say spiritual, I'm not defining how they would define that. It's a blanket statement. Even if you look at the definition in FM 7-22, it includes philosophy, religion, values, all those things. But it's important for us to have that conversation and to ensure that our soldiers are absolutely, and their family members for that matter, and our DA civilians, that everybody's ready.
And I just want to throw out, just because that importance of connectedness, because I think that sometimes there's such wonderful programming going on for the soldiers that we have to make sure we're also doing outreach to the family members, because they are big influencers as well. And while most of I think the majority, right, are not married in the Army, is that correct? There's still a large majority that are married. So how do we bring in those spouses? I talked to some young spouses in Germany, and they said, we never talk to anybody except our spouse, because we're so isolated. It's hard to get a job. There's nothing going on. We're just by ourselves, just us at home. And our neighbors are German. We don't speak German very well. We're isolated. So how do we include our spouses in that as well? And then by virtue of that, include the children of our soldiers as well. So I think thinking about how do we connect people to other people, and how the trickle effect that all of us affect all of us, right? How do we do that? How do we think about that?
So as a follow-up question to actually kind of stick along this line is, consideration for, like lower enlisted personnel as we talk about things related to quality of life and living a life or creating a life worth living. The youngest, the earliest in the career have the least agency, the least ability to do something to address quality of life issues or to create that purpose and meaning. What sort of considerations or thoughts? What could we maybe recommend to an early career soldier, or maybe are there considerations for leaders on how to take that into consideration?
Yeah, I'll throw out a quick program. I mean, or at least it's a portfolio of offerings that we have in the United States Army Chaplain Corps, and it's called Building Strong and Ready Teams. I know a lot of people heard about Strong Bonds. Well, we reformed Strong Bonds to be a lot more intentional about how we meet the needs of soldiers, right? But one of the things I think that's really great about the way we've reformed it into Building Strong and Ready Teams is the command team, the commander and the command sergeant major, or the commander and the first sergeant, who are living up close to the things that they see in their unit. And there's like 40-something programs that they could look down that list in consultation and advisement with their chaplain and say, hey, here's some of the things that we're seeing. It could be a communication issue in the squad, or a communication issue at home, or a challenge, with authority, or something along those lines. But yet, the command team can even introduce that to the ones who may not have a lot of agency as they're just coming into the Army, and may not even realize in some cases what they really need to, really be a part of the team, if you will.
I hear my Sergeant Major Petty in the back of my head when we have this conversation, because he always says, we need to make sure that our audio matches our video. And when I think about a life worth living and how externally we provide individuals with meaning and purpose, our most vulnerable are our junior soldiers. And here is something that I learned just in my 2 months of command. We have a group of individuals, young soldiers, new mothers, and parents that have food and financial insecurity. And one of our pediatricians with the Uniformed Services University observed that our soldiers were not taking advantage of the WIC program. This is a program that provides underserved and financially constrained families with vital resources for formula, for diapers, for you name it. Well, we have a whole population of these junior soldiers that could get WIC, and just because they didn't know about it, weren't getting their entitled services. And so we're looking at that. If we want to foster or cultivate a life worth living, I think we have to look first at our most vulnerable, and that is those junior soldiers. And then being a single soldier myself, look at our BOSS. What are your BOSS programs doing? And where are they going, and how are we taking advantage of all these resources? Because BOSS is another program that we have on our installations, but are we fully leveraging them? Are they really valuable? Are they providing exciting or fruitful experiences for our single soldiers? So one, I agree with our junior soldiers, focusing on them. Financial and food insecurity is a thing. We can't ignore it. It exists. So face it. And then also looking at our BOSS, I think is incredibly important.
I think it's important too, in that lens, we have personal financial counselors on every installation that can help with the economic and security. I think we talk about reducing stigma for behavioral health. We need to talk about reducing stigma for visiting our personal financial counselors. I think part of the problem, I believe, is that when you get counseled in the Army, it's not always a good thing. So there's a naming convention issue there, and I know Robin's here, and she can tell us all the reasons why we can't say consultants. There's a licensing issue with that. But, anybody in that room, so Ms. Brown said, pass the word. Pass the word. You have, you and your soldiers have access to these folks, and don't wait till there's a problem, right? They're there to help you from having a problem, and these folks also know everything about the WIC program and the SNAP program and other resources in the community and in the installation to help soldiers through that.
was told that we have a question in the back.
Hi. Oh, it's on. Hi, my name is Evie, and actually this is a question, Colonel Preston, to something that you said at this point a while ago. So you mentioned the command team, which is, in this instance, the company commander and the first sergeant, but when I think of the command team, it also includes the command spouse, if the person is married, or another family member who maybe steps up to help run the SFRG. Wonderful programs that you're all talking about, but are there any plans to take some of those programs and education to empower those spouse leaders, because they're also the ones that are, boots on the ground, impacting the families where their service member might be, only interacting with the soldiers at the company level?
What was your name again?
Evie.
Evie, thank you so much for that question. So when I was preparing for this, I met with some of the spouses at Fort Campbell, and I said, this is the forum, and I asked them specifically about SFRG. And I believe that our spouses are an incredible opportunity to be a promoter of a lot of things that we're discussing. However, we also need to consider that we can't simply stop there. What I was informed of is our makeup, our dynamic is changing. A lot of our spouses are now working, and so our FRGs, though incredibly, incredibly important, we can't simply provide the FRG the information and say, okay, that's sufficient. We actually need to completely reinvent how we communicate through our spouse networks, with the SFRG being one key aspect of that. And so what I've seen is that we use social media, both formal and informal. We put stuff out on social media, and then mission accomplished. We're good. But there is so much information inundating our spouses, our communities, that there is no synthesis of all of that information on what's truly important and what's truly available. So I would say that the SFRGs are incredibly important, and we must use them as much as possible, but we cannot be satisfied with just one avenue, because information is coming from so many others. And so thank you, Evie, for what you do with your SFRG, and for those FRG members here. If you can think of other ways that we can communicate out, it would be great.
And I think this, again, goes to the connectedness. I mean, we tend to trust people who we identify with. So spouses tend to trust other spouses. And so if you get a spouse who has a new baby to the new parent support play morning, and they're playing with their kids with other spouses, and they start talking about a need and say, hey, I have to use up my WIC coupons now. What's WIC? And then that goes. Or you have the leaders, who are usually the new parent support home visitors, hey, this month we're going to have someone from WIC come and talk to us. Then it becomes a kind of a different dynamic. So really that connectedness, again, is so important. Creating opportunities for spouses to meet spouses, families to meet families, to socialize together for whatever reason, in addition to having communication networks with some of these amazing programs, through pediatrics, through the child care, so that when you're dropping your children at child care, we don't assume the children are fine because they're in child care or they're in their after-school program, but actually have outreach there too, where we're providing information about resources there as well. So we're never stopping connecting families so they can learn from each other, as well as having those as opportunities, places to learn about the great resources that the military provides for families, because there's some great stuff out there that a lot of our families don't know about.
That's the challenge, right? So we hear there's so many things out there we don't know, it's confusing to access, or the Army doesn't have any programs at all. So where do we get to the happy medium? And communication problem will never be solved, right? We have to over communicate on these programs and services. But I agree, our enlisted non-married soldiers, it's tough to get at. So did I mention the training? Getting in the training base? That's one way. But we've got some pretty spectacular Army Community Service personnel that some that I know that would just get up at 04 in the morning and get a first sergeant to allow them 60 seconds in formation with a did you know. So I think there's some innovation out there, and we probably need to share some of those best practices.
I can say one thing that I learned on the SPERC meeting with family members as well as service members is another, I think, consideration going forward for the Army is how do we define family? And I think as society changes, maybe some of our old definitions or assumptions about what defines a family is perhaps obsolete. And so that certainly has not only implications for FRGs, but also just how we communicate, how we conduct programming as well, because we have a much wider diversity of family cohesion, family constellations now than we have previously. Well, I've got another kind of a couple of questions in the same area, so I'll ask these at the same time, and I think this will probably be our final question then, or final point of discussion. We have a few questions around like adverse childhood experiences and then pre-enlistment histories of adversity, challenges, trauma, things like that. So one question related to this is the Army considering screening for these past experiences, not as a means to deny entry, but as a way to potentially connect soldiers with resources earlier? And then likewise, the second question then is how do we teach young leaders to understand and recognize perhaps these historical factors and what they mean as opposed to perhaps looking at someone as a problem soldier?
So I can't answer. I know if General Stitt or Mr. Wallace was in here, they would probably talk a little bit about screening, and I know there's been discussion, although there's some level of complexity on how that's done and what gets screened. We had a recent conversation surrounding this very issue with regard to our recruits, and actually I was talking to the Secretary of the Army. So many of you know, so the school lunch program was created by the federal government as a result of World War I, and our soldiers were graduating, coming in, and they were malnourished. So we had to, do something about the health of our recruits. And I think we're looking at a very different problem now with regard to the childhood trauma. I think we need to get into the Department of Education and repartner again with this regard. We have to get into our education system, not just the training base this time, but Department of Ed and our school systems, not only from a emotional health perspective, but physical health, right? So I think General Vereen might agree that our recruits right now are not physically able, so we train them to bring up their physical health. We have to do the same for their emotional and mental health as well. We're not there yet. We're probably behind the power curve, but it's something that has to be done. I think.
Yeah, I would be, and this goes back, Craig, to what we were talking about earlier about screening. So childhood, what we do know, the science tells us that trauma is additive, especially in young children, and multiple traumatic experiences can cause long-term issues into adulthood. However, with that said, you have an individual who is completely high-functioning, who had a very, very hard life, but has no sequela from it, that wants to raise their hand and join the Army. We screen them and then let them know that they have all of these traumatic events. When they have all of the defense mechanisms supporting post-traumatic growth. And so I would offer having a system whereby we're sensitive in detecting individuals who may be suffering from polytrauma. That's what's important. But screening on the front end, I'm hesitant because we may start labeling individuals who are otherwise very high functioning and will be tremendous additions to our force.
Mm-hmm.
The way we use it with babies and toddlers is we help parents understand their own early adverse experiences can impact how they parent their young children. And we don't say that it is, again, it's not a given, it's an awareness. And so you do what you know until you learn something else that maybe is better, right? And so how do we help parents think through that by thinking about their own attachment styles, their own adverse experiences, and then what do they want to do for their child? And how you can change that trajectory for their child so that history is not repeated, right? And it's very effective. And many of our national Healthy Steps programs actually offer ACEs, or Adverse Childhood Experience Screening, as a part of their intake. That is not policy in DOD. It does not happen in DOD. But we do educate all of our Healthy Steps specialists about ACEs so they can have that conversation of, how do you want to make changes? What do you like about how you were parented, and what would you like to do differently? And how can we support you to be the kind of parent you want to be so that you're not repeating what you experienced yourself as a child? And I think that that's a very beautiful way of thinking about early trauma and thinking about how we take trauma and change it into post-traumatic growth.
Right. Well,
Dr. Brown, I was just going to say a word about the second part of the question you had, and that is a little bit on. I mentioned the Spiritual Readiness Initiative. So what that was then developed into is a spiritual readiness training. The intent all along was to get it down to our leaders, our junior leaders, so that our junior leaders could then recognize the challenges and then be a big help to their members of their squad or the members of their team. And so that's one of the things that we've seen. And I think from a prevention perspective, I think that the more we continue to do that, I think we'll get early warning signs, at least, of some of the challenges that might be coming our way, so that we can provide compassion and care and help to those who may be going through a difficult challenge in their journey. But it's a logical progression. You know, we did the initiative, now it's the training, and now pushing the training down to the lowest level so that then our leaders out in the Army can then help, deal with some of the challenges that we're seeing so that we can be a stronger, better Army.
Yeah. Okay, well, we are just about out of time. And so one last question, which is we'll allow each of our panelists to give just one very brief closing comment, maybe a takeaway message, call to action, or just one thing that you would like for the audience to leave with today. Ms. Geis?
Key takeaway is our communities are our first line of defense for building healthy communities. And that's everything from formal programs that we deliver to every touch point that we have with each other in our community, in our unit, the checkout person at the outdoor recreation center. It's all meaningful engagement, and it helps to build a healthy community or not. And I think we just all need to be mindful of that. But I appreciate the discussion today, and I thank you so much for monitoring us. Yeah.
Absolutely. General?
Yes, so I would say that, so in the very beginning, the Continental Army, George Washington, he was an advocate for chaplains. And he was an advocate for chaplains because his soldiers were out in the field, maybe rummaging through people's homes and all kinds of other places, maybe hitting a couple of taverns, you name it. And he wanted his soldiers to be ready, right? He absolutely wanted them to be ready. So 248 years later, we're still here. We're still here to help. We're still here to care, to provide compassion and love to the Army family. And when I say the Army family, I'm talking about every person that identifies with the Army family. We are here to do that. Many of you have chaplains in your formations, religious affairs specialists, they're in your formations, and they are ready and willing to help. My big ask and big takeaway is give them a shot. allow them to get out there and help you, because a lot of them came in to do it, and a lot of them have a sense of calling is the reason why they do what they do. So thank you very much. Thank you for moderating us and for this opportunity, absolutely, to speak on prevention, which is very, very important, because that is what's going to help us to fight and win our nation's wars. So, thank you.
Well, I'm going to close off with an observation. Having been a chief of behavioral health, not only of the Army, but at Schofield Barracks and Fort Carson, Force Com installations, what you're seeing here is we are modeling what every installation should have. We have a behavioral health expert, we have garrison, we have the chaplain, we have medical, and we have family services. Not all if you've been to one Army installation, you've been to one Army installation. They're all different, and they all need to be tailored. But if you have these individuals as your consulting group at wherever you go back to, that's incredibly important. And for those senior leaders in the room or garrison leadership in the room, please go back to your installations and make sure you empower your CR2Cs and actually make them a worthwhile task force that gets things done. If you do those things, you will then have your Verizon network behind you of informed individuals that will help you lead your community in the direction we all know you want them to go, which is towards wellness. So thank you.
Ms. Yuri.
I think I'd like to close with saying there are some just amazing professionals out there supporting you. And I have the honor and privilege of having had the opportunity to work with your new parent support home visitors who are highly trained, get classes all the time on how to think about adverse childhood experiences, think about trauma, think about early development, think about what behavior says about what's going on with that child psychologically, think about wellness and how to help these young ones be all that they can be. These are your new parent support home visitors that are there willing on every installation that you can take advantage of. Your Military One Source, who have these books for free for your families. Your family advocacy programs that go beyond just thinking about did you or did you not abuse your spouse, but how can we help your families be healthy and live a healthy life and get training in trauma-based therapies to offer the very best, to behavioral health, to your medical programs that have fantastic pediatricians and new programs like Healthy Steps, which I am very proud of. There's so many amazing people out there that are trying to really do their very best. And so how can we maximize that? How can we make it a point of learning about programs that you're not familiar with so you can enhance your ability to support those out there as well? Because the Army's got it going on. You guys have a lot of fantastic programs, strong professionals, and I am in awe of military families every day with the breadth of expertise that's out there. So I want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this today. And keep up the good fight. And I do think that the Army's going to make it happen. You are a family, and you are going to help people who are new feel a part of that family. And I think that's going to be one of the best things you could do for prevention. So thank you.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists for providing us with your expertise, insight, and valuable information. I think today's panel lays a foundation for the rest of the week as we discuss programs and services that support soldier and family readiness and resilience. So please give them a final round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
And at this time, I want to welcome Mrs. Angel Mangum to the stage to provide some closing comments.
Thank you, Dr. Bryan. Can we give him a round of applause and show our appreciation? So tomorrow, 9:30 Eastern Standard Time, will be our Family Forum 2. Let's get tactical. Resiliency and upstream prevention, toolkit building. To help you build your toolkit, right outside is Armed Forces Wellness Center. They have a table. Those centers are focused on improving quality of life with an upstream prevention approach by targeting behavioral modified factors, most likely to assist with disease processes injury and to help if you have performance issues. What they have is they have biofeedback. So they've got a couple devices out there. Please stop at their table. Family Forum 3, it's tomorrow afternoon at 1500 hours. That one is quality of life, target specific. That will be healthcare. Thank you guys very much for kind of starting that part off. And spousal employment. That all of the forums were Eastern Standard Time here in this room and online. Also, on your way out, please pick up a complimentary AUSA bag. Inside, you'll find the resources from our participants and from our exhibitors that are in the Family Readiness Pavilion down in Exhibit Hall A. Also, the QR code, very important. It's our first digital swag bag. You can access all of the stuff in here with that code as well. Finally, on your way out, please stop by and say hi to Ginger Perkins. She is signing the Army Spouse Handbook, and it's a complimentary gift for you. If you didn't know, she is also the author of Courtesies. I always get it wrong. We say CC&T in our world, but it is Customs, Courtesies, and Traditions of the Army. And it's a primer for family members. If you're interested in getting a copy, please go down to the AUSA Member Pavilion and see if you can get one. Thanks again to our sponsor, Leidos. And thank you, everyone, for your participation. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night.